What is up, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS5 and PS4 jailbreak news update. There is a lot of stuff that's come out for the PS5 and a few things for the PS4 as well. So we're going to go ahead and dive into it all here in this video. So first of all, Slayer's Gorvy has updated his implementation, his exploit on the PS5 that now allows it to use a map self function. So this ability kind of allows you to dump the executable files, I believe from memory because they're decrypted. So you can actually dump things like the DLLs and the executables from the PS5, which, you know, gives devs a lot more insight into how things are made and can find some interesting stuff on the PS5 to maybe take advantage of. So shortly after this was kind of released, we got Zekoshal or Control Execute, who released a dump of the PS5 EXEs, the executable files here, and also a dump of the DLL files as well. And these are decrypted. You can open them in DNSpy. You can see I've got the executables downloaded here and the DLL files as well here, which there are quite a lot of. So you can use a debugger like DNSpy to open them here. You can see I've got this React Native Modules Shell UI DLL open. And this was kind of mentioned by OSM, who of course is the guy behind the overlays on the PS4. He kind of discovered how to manipulate the PS4's UI to add overlays and customize the menus. So he's had a look and seen some interesting stuff, some dev stuff there in this particular module for the PS5. So he says most of the cool stuff is in Shell UI React Native Shell app.dll, which is what we're in right here. We're in Shell UI, we're in Home UI. And in here, there's quite a few different kind of debug options that you can find in here. And what's interesting about these is that a lot of these kind of links are kind of the same links that we use to run things like the debug settings through a shortcut on the home menu or with the notifications. So we can actually take these and try and use them on the PS5 by adding them to the notifications database or the app database, just to kind of play around with these and see if we can get any of these additional debug options. You can see there's quite a few there. You've got like debug activity preview, debug delete, debug core files, you know, debug menu, package check, and a bunch of other ones. I didn't check them all. I didn't really go for the Playgo ones because there's quite a few different Playgo ones, but I have looked at a few of the other ones and we've got them up here on the PS5. So if we switch over to the PS5, I'll show you guys a few of the different debug options. So if I head into my notifications, you can see I've added them all here into the debug settings. Now I'll probably release this notification file in the description. Basically, you just modify it the same way I've shown in my tutorial where I showed you guys how to set up, you know, website links as a notification. And it's basically the same process. I just did it to the debug settings option. So instead of just having debug settings, we have all of these other debug options that we found from that DLL file, that decrypted DLL. So firstly, we have this activity preview. Now I have had to set this up for a static title ID because you can see that these source files here, they have like title ID equals and then the title ID. So I've had to like hard code in one title ID to apply these two just to test them out. So it's not very practical for actual use because then you would have to add a link, you know, a link for every single title ID for every app that you have on your system in order to make any of this stuff really, you know, usable at this stage. But this is just to kind of see what options we have. So going back to the PS5, you can see this option just says sign in to use network features. So I have this set up for Astro's Playroom PPSA 01325, but it just cannot load anything because this activity preview requires PSN. So not much we can really do with that option. Now I've got so many added here that it's kind of bugged out the notifications a little bit, so it's a bit hard to select it, but we've got this check option. So this just says checking. I've left this for a while. It doesn't seem to do anything. Perhaps you have to leave it for longer for it to check the package, I guess. I'm not entirely sure, but this is all that comes up. It just says checking and then nothing else after that. So if we go back into notifications, obviously we have debug settings, that's as usual. Then we have the delete option. Now this one actually is quite interesting because this gives us different options for deleting different parts of a particular package or a particular app. So you can delete, you know, all users, all save data. So the save data for all user accounts for that app, or just delete all the save data for your user account. And then you can delete the download data, the temporary data, the additional content. So that would just delete any DLC that you have installed. And you can also delete the patch. Now I've set this up for God of War. because this is the only game I have an update installed for. So if I go into options and go to information, you can see I'm currently on version 1.35. However, what I can do is I can go into notifications, I can go to debug settings, I can go to that delete option, and then we'll just tell it to delete the patch only. So we tell it to delete the patch, we hit delete, click yes, and give it a few seconds. There we go. If I head into options now, you can see we're back down to 1.00. So that's a method to actually delete a patch. So if you did have any updates that were installed, then you could delete them to get the game back to the base version without having to delete the entire game and reinstall it from the disk again, which would obviously take quite a bit of time. But again, it's not super useful because you have to hard code in the title ID for each game that you want to delete. So probably is just about as slow as it would take to just reinstall from the disk anyway. But still, an interesting option, especially if we could get that implemented properly in the future with some kind of payload that would enable it for all the apps. So you could just hit options on whatever app you have and have that option to delete all of the different types of content for the app instead of going through it with the notifications here. So then we've got generate core file, which doesn't appear to do anything. Perhaps it requires more parameters. Then we've got save data management. So this just links us straight to, the normal save data on the PS5, which isn't anything particularly new, although this is specified in the DLL as a debug, like debug save data management. However, it just seems to go into the normal save data management. It doesn't seem to have any additional options. And then if we take a look at show activity configuration, so this pretty much just gives us the same stuff as before. So nothing useful there. And then finally, we have got switch content config, which again doesn't seem to do much. And then the last thing we have, which I'm not entirely sure what this is about, but we've got workspace settings, which brings this up where we've got not installed, and we can install workspaces from USB mass storage device or from the M.2 drive, which I don't have a M.2 drive hooked up to my PS5 at the moment. So yeah, not entirely sure what this is about, but yeah, you've got workspaces there. So those are all the main kind of debug options that were found in those decrypted DLL files. There's probably plenty more. There's a few that I didn't try, like some of the Plago stuff as well. So I'm sure more will be found potentially, and maybe there'll be something else that's useful. The only thing that I've found so far that's useful is that delete option. Being able to just delete the DLC or just delete the patch from an app is pretty useful. But obviously it needs a better implementation so that we don't have to hard code in the title ID in order to apply those options to. There are a few other things on the PS5 as well. We do have a payload. I believe this was created with the SDK that Spectre released that I talked about in one of my previous videos. So this is a payload to disable system updates. So we finally have a disable system updates payload. You run it once to disable the updates. You run it again to enable the updates. And supposedly this also works during a restart. So you should be able to restart your PS5 and it should still be applied. So I wouldn't completely rely on this payload on its own because, again, this is still early stages and it may not, perfectly block all system updates in all scenarios. So it's a good extra layer of protection to enable it if you want. But I would also combine this with other methods like the DNS blockers or, blocking system updates on your network or something like that, just to be extra safe. But that's another option as well. You've got this payload that you can run. You just inject the payload like you would any other payload, just like the FTP payload on the PS5 with Spectre's exploit, using a payload injector like Netcat GUI. So one last thing for the PS5 is that we do also have some button combinations that have been discovered to enable some hidden menus on the PS5. I believe these were also discovered using those dumped decrypted DLLs. So we've got this retail one. This one might have been here already. So L1 plus L3 plus triangle for 5 seconds, and then let go and press up and options. Then you've got staff mode, which we already knew about. We've also got PSN in-game commerce. So in the debug settings, you push at the same time left, square, and R1 to enable extra debug settings for PSN in-game commerce. I tried this just in the debug settings. It didn't seem to do anything. And then there's also this one here that says in anywhere in the main menu, push at the same time start plus L3 to enable extra debug menu, although whatever this is, this debug menu for settings must be enabled. So not really knowing what this is, I wasn't able to change this. Again, this didn't do anything for me when I was in the debug settings, but there are some sort of screenshots here showing you some of these hidden menus, as you can see right here. So yeah, you can give that a try and see if you can get it to pop up on your system. Okay, so that is pretty much everything we have so far for the PS5. So let's go ahead and move on to some PS4 news. So firstly, we have the idea of God of War. Everybody's waiting for God of War Ragnarok. I'm pretty excited for that game on the PS5. But of course, there's a lot of people hoping that it's going to come to the PS4. And I think we probably will see a PS4 backport of this game. I mean, why not? We've seen backports of many other big releases so far coming to the 9.00 PS4s. So for example, we've had, of course, Elden Ring, we've got Forbidden West, Stray, all of these games and more have come backported to 9.00 by CYB1K or Cyber1000. So we're all hoping that he'll be able to successfully backport God of War Ragnarok as well. So apparently, according to CYB1K, he says, despite the rumors, he does not have the package file right now. He does not have a version of the game to actually start backporting. So we'll probably have to wait for the game to come out, and then it may take several days or a week or more potentially, or he could just be trolling. Maybe he already has it and is working on backporting it already. We'll have to wait and see. I did see one screenshot. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it now, but I did see one screenshot showing the game as a fake package file, although that could just be easily a faked image or a troll. So I wouldn't really read into that too much at this stage. And I also saw a retail copy of it, the retail package, loaded into, I think, Orbis Pub Check application, the fake package tools, which did show the SDK version for the game was 9.60, which I think should be backportable by the looks of things. So hopefully we'll get a backport for God of War Ragnarok shortly after it comes out. I mean, I was hoping that maybe we could get it leaked a bit early, like with when Dying Light 2 came out before the game officially released. But because it takes time to backport these things, and you know, if CYB1K doesn't even have the game yet to start backporting, then it's probably going to be a little while after the game releases before we might see a backported version for jailbroken PS4s. So just wanted to briefly talk about that. Okay, so the other big piece of news here on the PS4 is that we finally have the PS4 Pro performance issues in Linux fixed. They have been fixed thanks to a collaboration by the PS3 ETA team and Mikaho. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name properly, but thanks to that dev and the PS3 ETA team, we have the performance issues finally resolved. So this was a big issue going back a long time. So on 5.05, we had, you know, the Linux payloads, and the performance was about 27 FPS in Unigine Valley benchmark. That's what I use. I usually set the texture detail to medium and I leave all the other settings default and I run a benchmark. And comparing that to the base PS4 normally got about 22 FPS and the PS4 Pro would get about 27 or 28 FPS when running those tests. That was kind of the standard performance that you would expect on the 2 gigabytes of VRAM payload. However, once the 7.55 jailbreak came out, we got the Linux payloads ported, and then suddenly my performance was just like cut in half on the PS4 Pro. And this continued on to the 9.00 jailbreak as well. So what would happen is I would get about 13 to 14 FPS in Unigine Valley benchmark, all the same settings, didn't change anything, and half the performance of what it should be, even significantly worse than what a base PS4 gets. So yeah, and this has been that way for well over a year, probably about 2 years at this point. And it's just kind of sucked for PS4 Pro users. Now, there might be some PS4 Pros that didn't have this issue. It may have been limited to certain Southbridge chips. I'm not entirely sure. My PS4 Pro uses the Belize 2 Southbridge, whereas others use the Belika Southbridge. So it's possible that people who had the Belika Southbridge didn't have this issue. But unfortunately, my PS4 Pro was one of the ones that had this huge performance issue. So thankfully, this has now been fixed. At last, I did a test here and I got 28 FPS in Unigine Valley benchmark. I then went back and ran the old payload and was still getting, you know, degraded performance, 13, 14 FPS. So yeah, definite huge improvement here. It's finally been fixed. And apparently there's even more performance on the table, which we kind of expected for the PS4 Pro. Unfortunately, though, that was not able to be fully unlocked. So you can see here that the PS3 ETA team said that they tried to find a method to enable all compute units on the PS4 Pro, and get full performance, but they arrived at a dead end because Linux would just freeze. So that's unfortunate because there's more performance on the table that could maybe be unlocked with more development or more work put in here to the PS4 Pro. But at the moment, I'm just happy that it's back up to the performance level it was back with the 5.05 jailbreak, where we're getting 27, 28 FPS, which is still a significant bump from what the base PS4 gets at about 21, 22 FPS. And again, that's with the 2 GB of VRAM payload without using any kind of overclock payloads or anything like that. So if you want to run these payloads, I know that Echo Stretch has updated his 7-in-1 host to include these updated payloads, so you can just load them from there. Alternatively though, if you want to inject them manually, you just need to run the Mira payload and then inject the payloads using port 9021 in Netcat GUI or some other payload injector, and that is how you get things up and running. I wouldn't run Gold Hen first, because, well, you can't use the Gold Hen bin loader anyway to load these payloads because they have to be loaded with the Mira loader. And also, you know, I have had issues where I load Gold Hen and then try and load the payload, and I'll just get like a black screen or no signal, and the PS4 does not actually boot into Linux. It doesn't go into the blue LED with the flashing purple lights. It's just kind of frozen with the white light, the white LED, when I run Gold Hen and then try and inject the payload, which is why personally I just run Mira first rather than Gold Hen. So don't touch Gold Hen, just run Mira and then inject the payload, or just load the payload directly from an exploit host that already has the payloads updated. So yeah, awesome stuff there. Finally, we've got the PS4 Pro back up to the performance that it once was. So yeah, super thanks to the PS3 ETA team and this developer here who I can't pronounce. And yeah, thanks to them for finally fixing this issue, because yeah, it's just been a long-standing issue that, you know, has needed to be fixed for a long time, but I guess nobody's really looked hard enough to figure out what was going on, and I'm just glad that they finally were able to do it. So yeah, anyway, that is basically it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this update or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.